is Emor. And it begins by telling us that this is going to be about Kohanim. V'yomer Hashem o Moshe. Hashem tells Moshe, Emor ala Kohanim. Speak, this time we're going to do something different. You're going to speak to the Kohanim, who are the children of Aaron. V'yamarta lehem, and say the following. And then it goes through the general laws of what a Kohen, the obligations of a Kohen that separates him from the non-Kohanim. So he says, like, each of you shall not contaminate himself to a dead person among his people, except for the following, right? The laws of how a Kohen can't go to a funeral, can't go to a cemetery, can't go into a building that has a deceased person, except if it's one of the following, which are his closest relatives: his mother, his father, his son, his daughter, his brother, right? His unmarried sister. Right? Those are the ones, right, that he's allowed to. But anyone else, he's not allowed to go to the cemetery, go to the funeral. He's not allowed to come in contact with the dead. And then it tells you a number of other things that they can't do. So why do we have to have a whole parsha call about this? You know, I mean, we have some pretty important laws. We don't have the parsha of Shabbos. We don't have a whole parsha dealing with kosher. We don't have a whole parsha dealing with lots of other things. And here's the laws that don't even pertain to everyone. Not even it's a small percentage. It's not even a whole tribe, Kohen. Kohen is a subset of the tribe of Levi. Right? So they have to make a whole parsha that Hashem goes out of his way to tell Moshe, to tell the Kohanim. It could have been a sentence or two, right? And then we would have learned the rest from the Talmud. So it's if you look at Rashi sort of is wondering also about this. So he says, Emor, what does it mean to say? V'yamarta l'hizar ha'gadolim malakatanim. Right? God is telling Moshe to tell the Kohanim that they have to educate their children in this. And it says, literally, it says that you have to warn the larger ones, the older ones have to warn the younger ones. That is, you could imagine that to be a Kohen is a great privilege. They have many, wonderful things that happen. That they get certain respect simply because of who they are. They have a certain role in the base of Mikdash. They have very special things simply because of what family they have, and then they have to, of course, carry that. But as always, we have a concept of with privilege comes responsibility, right? You might be a privileged person that can go to the head of the line. You can be a person who has a driver instead of driving your own car. You can be a person who gets a special parking spot. But you have a responsibility that comes along with it that is also more than the average person. And for a Kohen who's an adult, he can understand that, but a child finds that's difficult. You imagine a child goes to play baseball with his friends and the ball goes into a cemetery. He can't go get it. He can't get the ball. Right? A Kohen who falls for a woman, right? He might not be able to marry her if she's a divorcee, right? And in and of itself, we see from our own culture tells us there's nothing wrong with a divorced woman. She could have been married to a crazy man. It could have been a million very, very legitimate reasons that have absolutely no reflection on the woman as to why she's divorced, and yet a Kohen can't marry her. So you can see that as far as a Kohen is concerned, right? If you look through the eyes of a child, for sure, when you're talking about playing baseball and all these other things, he's going to see this as a pain. I can't do this, and I can't do this, and I can't do this, and you tell me, oh well, I'm a Kohen, I get special things. What do you get? You get truma. Big deal. You don't get truma today. You get to work at a temple. There is no temple today. Oh, look who's here.
Morning. Sorry,
right?
We light.
That's okay. So so a Kohen really doesn't. He might have privileges, but he certainly doesn't. For a child's going to see it. He's going to see these privileges are gone. There are no real privileges today. He gets the first aliyah in shul, right? But all the things he doesn't have to get to do. So the Torah is taken into account that this is going to be a difficult thing. I mean, I know we've all heard ourselves, even if we're not Kohanim, when you have kids who have to get ready for their bar mitzvah, or they go to Hebrew school, they don't go to day school, they come home and they complain, all my friends can play baseball and football, and I'm going to Hebrew school. Right? It's like that. There's a privilege in being Jewish, right? We're the ethical leaders of the world, but there's also responsibility. You have to learn what it means, and you have to be able to do the practices. And that means if you're a 12-year-old kid, you got to be prepared for being 13, and you can't go play baseball all the time, right? So it becomes a difficult thing. We can understand it. So that's why Rashi says that they made a special parsha out of this, where it says that Hashem tells Moshe, and then he says, "Say to the Kohanim," right? He already said that he should convey the information. So here it means that the Kohanim themselves should say from one generation to the next. They should educate them as to the privileges. Like for instance, now if I was a Kohen and I would be telling my child that you can't do this and you can't do this and you can't do this, but you get to eat truma, and he's going to say, well, eating truma, the special food the Torah obligates everybody to give for the Kohen to support him. He says, big deal. There's no temple. There's no truma today. I don't get any truma, and I still got to follow all the rules, right? So the fact is that the fact that we give a Kohen the first aliyah in shul, right? That's in place of truma. Right? That's why a Kohen gets a special aliyah because of that, and it's an important thing that the Kohen, right? There's a mitzvah for a Kohen to guard the respect of the priesthood. That he, like for instance, you have a bar mitzvah going on in shul, and the rule is the Kohen is first, the Levi is second, and then if you want to give the bar mitzvah's family aliyahs, it comes after that, right? So you don't have that many left. There's only 6 more, right, including Maftir. So the family will want more, right? So what they'll sometimes want to do is they'll want to make it so that if you ask the Kohanim to leave the room, so then there's no Kohen here, and somebody else can get the aliyah. If there's no Kohen, you don't skip the aliyah, right? So, but there are Kohanim in the room. So sometimes I'll go and ask them, would you mind stepping out? So when we call people to the Torah, you won't be here, and then we can call somebody else, right? So, I can present you with a case where you'd understand it. You can have a case where you have a weekday bar mitzvah, you only have 3 aliyahs, right? Mm-hmm. And you have Kohen, Levi, and then the bar mitzvah boy. But what about his father? And so let's say, you have a case where somebody is, let's say he's raised by his grandfather because his parents died, and his grandparents went out of their way to take care of, right? And now it's time for his bar mitzvah, and the grandfather can't even get an aliyah, right? So you'd say, just ask the Kohen to step out, then he can do it, so he can understand it. Now I can give you a case where it sounds, your heart opens to them, but a Kohen could say no. What?
If there's no Kohen, would the Levi be promoted first?
But in general, it would mean that the whole rule no longer applies. So then what happens is that you ask the Kohen to leave. A Kohen has also an obligation to keep the respect of the priesthood, which means he has a bit of an obligation to say, no, I won't step out. Not because he doesn't feel for it, he feels for them. He wants to do it, but he also has to respect it. So it's a dilemma the Kohen is put in. It doesn't mean the Kohen has to say no. But we can understand that sometimes a person who would be a very kind person, right, who would always go out of his way for others, might say no because he has now conflicting ethics, right? So we see that there is an idea of the privileges for a Kohen, right? It's not just the Kohen has to go in the special room at the funeral, and a Kohen can't go into the cemetery, right? It's hard for a Kohen to be a pulpit rabbi. And some shuls don't want to hire them because they can't do funerals. They have to do a funeral from another room, right? So some shuls say, what are you going to do? You're going to hold it against him? If he's a good rabbi, you take him. Other shuls, well, it makes a big deal, especially a shul that has a lot of older people, and people are dying often, and it's a very important part of the shul, right? In other shuls, they have all different ages, and it's not necessarily as common. So that's how it goes. So that's why it opens up with talking about a Kohen. Now, when it tells us here on the bottom of this page, beginning with verse 7, it says, "Isha zona v'chalala lo yichu, v'isha grusha me'isha lo yichu." That a man should not marry a woman who is a harlot, that says in the English, or has been desecrated, and shall not marry a woman who's been divorced by her husband. So what does that mean? If we look at even in the commentary in the translation, so right here it talks about a harlot. It doesn't necessarily mean a prostitute, a woman who actually takes payment. It usually means a woman who's had a physical relationship with a non-Jew, or a woman who was desecrated. What that means. So he says here, and just in the English, it tells you, right? She's been desecrated. It means a woman who's been forbidden to marry a Kohen. Right. Well, it goes through. It doesn't tell you why. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Here it's talking about a case of rape. So one is willful, one is not willful. And then it talks about a divorced woman. So let's take a step back for a minute and wonder about this. Like here you've got a divorced woman, you have other women who things happen to. It's not that they didn't choose for this to happen. Things happened. But you can even have a woman who's like a Baal Tshuva. She wasn't raised observant. Now she's observant. When she wasn't observant, she didn't know anything about the Jewish laws of intimacy and how one should act. And in the society she lived in, people are not as stringent. They're looser than perhaps they should be. And she had a relationship with a non-Jew, and now she's 20 years old, and she becomes religious and wants to get married, and she can't marry a Kohen. Right? And I gave you already an example of a divorced woman can't marry a Kohen. Right? So why is that? Like, why is it that these women, who clearly, throughout the Torah, they never hold anything against them. A woman who's raped, it's not her fault. They're not prosecuting the victim. So why do they say that a Kohen can't marry these people? Well, add to it, we'll see shortly that there are certain things about a Kohen that excludes him from practicing as a Kohen. That is to say, he still has the rules that he can't break, but he can't even have the privileges. For instance, if a Kohen has a deformity on his body, he's not allowed to practice as a Kohen. And what's a deformity? He's got one arm longer than the other. I don't mean 6 inches. It could be half an inch longer. Most people have an arm longer than another, so it's not noticeable, but let's say it's noticeable. Right? Or you could have, I guess the most extreme example would be he has one eyebrow. One long eyebrow, right? You know, people have sometimes hair in between, so they have one long eyebrow. Yeah, that's a person who can't practice as a Kohen in the temple. So now we take these examples. He can't marry a woman who was divorced and through no fault of hers. He can't practice as a Kohen if he's got one long eyebrow. So like, what's the Torah doing here? They're telling us these rules that seem to be so, prejudicial and bigoted. So the answer is that the Torah is not doing that, because if you read the Torah, you see that throughout it, it's extremely sensitive to the victims and to people who have some type of deformity, and to people who are different and people who are strangers. The Torah goes out of its way to tell us you can't treat these people badly. So why does the Torah itself do it? So the answer is the Torah is not doing it. The Torah is telling us the following. The Torah is raising a question. What is the role of a Kohen? Is the Kohen an extension of the human being who is serving God, or is he an extension of God receiving from the human being? I'll give you the example. The Kohen's working in the temple, and while he's working in the temple, you have let's say, he's going to take a sacrifice. You want to come in and you want to give a sacrifice. So you did something wrong, you come to offer your sacrifice. So the Kohen slaughters the animal, cuts up the animal, offers it on the sacrifice, gives you part of it to eat, and the Kohen himself eats some of it. Right? That's what the Kohen's doing. So what is he? Is he doing this because you can't do it? You're not allowed. You're not a Kohen. So is he doing it for you in order to enable you to fulfill this mitzvah to God? Or are you actually fulfilling the mitzvah by bringing it, and he is playing the role of God, so to speak, and taking the animal and finishing the job? Right? So either way, it doesn't really matter the answer to the question, because either way, he has a very unique role. And that when the Jew comes to the temple, he sees the Kohen as a holy entity, and in some ways he sees him as an extension of the temple itself. It could be an extension of God, it could be an extension of a person, but it's certainly of the temple. And therefore, in the eyes of the people, the Kohen has to be perfect. Because he's like God, right, in some way, or he is like an extension of our understanding of what Torah is, what Judaism is, what the temple is. that is perfect. It's perfect. There's no flaws in the Torah. There's no flaws in Judaism. So the Kohen also has to appear to have no flaw. So a Kohen who, right, it's not that the Kohen has a flaw and there's something wrong with him. It's that the person coming perceives the flaw and thinks there's something wrong with him. In other words, the Torah is saying this is human nature. Human beings point a finger at a divorced woman and say there's something with her. Is there? Probably not. But they'll say, today it's not as common, of course, there's so many divorces. But when we were kids, right, there was a divorced woman, they looked at him funny. Right? There's something wrong with her. Why would she be divorced? Something wrong here. That's how it used to be, how the world looked at it. It's not true. She could be married to a crazy man. It could have been, she's a totally regular, wonderful woman, and she made one mistake in her life. She married a guy who appeared normal and he was crazy. So she had to get a divorce. It doesn't make her bad, right? But there's that feeling in society was like that. It's the same idea with a woman who has a Jewish woman has a relationship with a non-Jewish man, right? So you say, well, she raised in a society they didn't know better, but still, people in society look at her funny. So the Torah says the Kohen has to appear to be perfect, not just be perfect. He has to appear that way, and therefore he can't do certain things, right? It's sort of like, back when Diana was around, the princess. So you look in the newspaper, they have a picture of her wearing a low-cut gown, right? And it was a big scandal. Yeah, you go to any wedding and women are dressed that way or more revealing. They don't put them in the newspaper. Why do they put the princess in the newspaper for dressing like that? Can't, because they think it's a beautiful gown, because she could buy anything she wants. She doesn't. She probably even have to buy it. She gets it for free. So why? Because royalty doesn't expose itself to the regular people, right? Royalty doesn't walk around half-dressed in front of regular people. That's not how you do it. You're royalty. You have privileges of royalty, you have responsibility of royalty. So the Kohen is the same, right? Is there anything innately in the society that the princess lived in, is it wrong for her to show her calves? No, not in the society she's from, but there is, because she's the princess. Princesses don't do that. Regular people do it. Movie stars do it. Models do it. Panada, princess. Right? That's the idea. A Kohen is like that representation. Does it mean that the Torah is telling us that it's okay to treat people that way, to say that there's something wrong with a divorced woman, or a guy who's got one arm longer than the other, there's something less about him? Not at all. The Torah says it's forbidden to treat people that way, but the Torah knows we do it. So it says when the Kohen represents God, so therefore the Kohen has to appear godly, and he gets privileges because of it. So that's why it is. So in no way, I know it sounds apologetic, but I think in no way is the Torah telling us that there's anything less about any of these people, right? Especially since I think today, I bet it was probably the case then too, we all have flaws, physical flaws. We just don't tell people. People don't know it, right? They say our clothing hides a multitude of sins, right? All kinds of things about us. We all have it, right? But we have the ability to cover it up or to hide it or to change it, make things different. I mean, if a guy has one eyebrow, it's not real hard to fix, right? You can fix it, shave it, that's all, and you don't have one eyebrow anymore. But for whatever reason, the Torah says that that's an example. So that's really what it's telling us. I think it's an important thing to understand. And this whole thing goes on for a couple of pages saying this, as to who and what. And like if you look on 674 and 675, it tells us that Hashem tells Moshe, speak to Aaron, any man who's a Kohen, right, who has a blemish can't go into the work in the temple. So it says, right, it's a blemish, a man who's blind, he's lame, whose nose has no bridge, right? I guess there's something about his nose, has one limb longer than the other, he'll have a broken leg or a broken arm, who has an abnormally long eyebrow, or a membrane on his eye, or a blemish in his eye, dry skin, and so forth. All of these are examples that the Torah says that he can't work in the temple. But let's keep it in mind. Those people are nothing wrong with them. They're just not perfect, right? Not only that, who made them this way in most cases? God did. And then God makes him a Kohen, and then he makes him this way, right? He creates a guy who's got whatever it is, he's got one eyebrow. He created him. He creates a guy blind, and he creates him to be a son of a Kohen. So what's the purpose? He's a Kohen and he can't do anything. Right? So it's showing you that it's not something wrong with the person. It's how the perception is by those coming. That's what the Torah is telling us. And then it goes on with other similar types of things. It goes through it goes through a whole section about a Kohen's food. That the Kohen eats truma. Truma, I mentioned that before. Truma is that a portion of the food that is grown. Let's say I'm a farmer living in Israel. A portion of my food has to be given to the Kohen. So I have to give some to the poor, to the Kohen, sometimes to the Levi. There's different places the food goes. And it's part of my obligation as a Jew to do that in order to support them. Because a Kohen has no job, right? A Kohen works in a temple. Who pays him? How does he make a living? So that's how he makes a living. In fact, some Kohanim, especially in the first temple, were very rich. If you go to today, you go to Jerusalem and they do excavations. Some are legal, some are illegal, but there's excavations. So there's this one called Beit Zannenberg, right? And it's in the old city. And this guy, I guess he was a wealthy guy, he bought a house and he lived on the top and he hired people to go underneath his house and excavate. And they found underneath his house an enormous house that had been, somewhat destroyed and was underground, that had belonged to a Kohen. And it had like 6 washrooms. And they had mikvahs in the washrooms because Kohen had to be in a state of purity. He would go to the mikvah all the time. And it was enormous, like 25 bedrooms, 25 rooms, let's say. It was enormous. Like, who could afford a house like that? But some Kohanim, because they got so much of food and so many things, so many gifts and so many things from the people, that they were wealthy people. Not everyone, right? But some of them were. Right? So it tells you that truma is really the food that supports them. Now it does say also that if a Kohen breaks the rules, right, it's a serious thing. If a Kohen decides, I'm going to marry this woman anyways, I'm going to marry a convert, right? There's nothing wrong with a convert, right? But a Kohen can't marry a convert. So, and it's not because she converted. It's because the Torah presumes, when you're dealing with the ancient people, that the converts were loose. And a Kohen can't marry a woman who was a loose woman, right? Like we said already. So they would presume that they had societies, right, where they were known that they didn't have the same ethics that the Jews had. So if a woman converted, that was the case. So what if a Kohen goes and he does it anyways? He says, I don't care. I fall in love with this woman. Like, why would God bring me into this world, bring her into this world, and make it so that we should fall in love with each other and then I can't marry her? It's not right. That's what the guy will say, and he does it. So what happens? So the Torah tells us here that there's punishments, right? In this world, and punishments in the world to come. But what some people say, you hear this on the street, that the guy can just give up his being a Kohen. Just give it up. I'm not a Kohen anymore. I won't get the first aliyah. So that's not true. There's no such basis for that. There is a reality to the fact that if you have a Kohen who does something. Let's say a Kohen marries a divorced woman, right? Goes and marries a divorced woman, and they have a child. So what's that child? The child didn't do anything wrong, right? He didn't marry a divorced woman, right? But he's what's called a chalala, which means the offspring of an illegal marriage. So he's not a mamzer, right? A mamzer is also an offspring of a legal marriage, but that's in the case where there was adultery on the part of the woman. But this is a case where with the Kohen, so he loses his status as a Kohen. The child does. The father doesn't, but the father can't practice as long as he's a sinner, which means it's a sin for him to stay married to this woman. So he can't practice as a Kohen because of his actions, but part of his actions are that he affected his children. Right? They ask that question all the time. Like, why, of all things, a mamzer is the best example. A mamzer can't marry another Jew, can only marry a convert. It can't it can marry another mamzer, right? And a mamzer's children are mamzers. And you say, it's like, put it all together, these mamzers, right, are, it's a horrible punishment they have, right? I mean, even the word mamzer is a derogatory word. So what did they do wrong? Nothing. Right? So we'd say, like, why would God do that? The fact is, it's not that God did it. The parents did it. God says this is, the sanctity of marriage is an important thing. To go and commit adultery is a horrible destruction of marriage, right? Even if you want to, like, let's put aside the way the Torah looks at it, but in our own lives, if we would say that a man could have more than one wife, let's say, all right, today they can't. Jewish law doesn't let them, but let's say they could, and you're married to a man, and he goes and he has relations with another woman, right? Now, you'd say I'm allowed to, right? Let's say he's allowed to. What does that do to your marriage? Right? Even if he's not doing anything illegal, right? In our conversation, it's not illegal, right? What it does, it destroys the marriage. Right? There's something gone now. Something's right. The fact that he's not uniquely to me, he's not uniquely together with me, it means there's something missing. There's something wrong. You can say it's good, it's not bad, good, whatever, but it's real. It's there, right? And in the case of we're dealing here, like with a mamzer, right? This happens with the woman does this, and they have they have a child, and the child. It's not that the child did anything wrong, it's that the parents did something so wrong that it causes that the child has an effect. No different than if you have two people who are carriers of a disease and they get married, and the child is born with the disease. Let's say you have people who are carriers of TCS. So today, like my daughter, when she was dating, she had to go. She took a test. They take a genetic test, and all the young Jewish kids today, they take this test, and the organization that does it keeps the records, and they give you a number. And what happens if you're dating someone and it gets serious? So you call the organization and you give each other's number to them, and they compare the genetics. And if they're both carriers of a disease, they tell you that there's an issue, there's a problem, right? And if they're not, then they tell you it's not a problem. Right? So let's say they tell you there's a problem. Now you can't get married. You say, well, why would God do that? He's punishing me. I can't marry the person I love. God made me love this person, right? I can't marry them because we're going to have cases. So you know what? We're going to do it anyways. It's only a 1 in 4 chance. Right? And then the kid has hay sex. So what did the kid do wrong? Nothing. What did the parents do wrong? They really didn't do anything wrong in this case. Maybe they did because they were a little bit reckless. Right? They were playing the odds and they lost. But in the case, right, but the fact is, in the case of a mamzer, they're doing something wrong. And the parents know, if you do this, your child will have a spiritual defect. Just like if you do this, your child will have a physical defect. It's not the child's fault. It's the parents' fault. Right? It's the same with the Kohen. If a Kohen does something he shouldn't do, his child has this status of being a chalala. A chalal comes from chilul, which means desecration. He comes from a desecrated marriage, and it affects his status. And that's where it comes from. Now the topic changes. When we get to 682 and 683 in the fourth Aliyah, it starts talking about the holidays. And it's very interesting in that we could spend the rest of the day talking about the holidays if we wanted to, but there is something very interesting about how they tell us. At first, it talks about Shabbos, right, and then it goes into Pesach, right, like we did just now. Then the Omer. Right, the Sfiras Omer, which is between Pesach and Shavuos, and then it gets to Shavuos, 684 and 685. But if you notice then, what happens afterwards, right after the Shavuos, it should go to Rosh Hashanah. And if you look, it'll say Rosh Hashanah. Mm-hmm. But before Rosh Hashanah, the topic changes. It's sort of like we're watching this television show about the Jewish holidays, and then after 15 minutes, they put a commercial in. Right here, we learn about Pesach and Sfiras Omer and Shavuos. Right, it's following the year very well. We're in Sfiras Omer. Pretty soon we'll be at Shavuos, and then after Shavuos, you have the summer, and comes Rosh Hashanah, then comes Sukkot, right, Yom Kippur, then Sukkot. So then. But if you look here at the top of 686 and 687, I'll just read like from the top, right on 687. It's concluding the section on Shavuos. There should be a holy convocation for yourselves. You should do no work. It's an eternal decree in your dwelling. Right? That's the last line talking about Shavuos. Shavuos is a holiday. You can't work on Shavuos. Then suddenly the topic stops. And it says, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not remove completely the corners of your field as you reap, and you shall not gather the gleanings of your harvest for the poor, and the proselyte shall you leave them. I am Hashem your God. Then it says, Rosh Hashanah. So here it goes, right? Pesach, Spirit Omer, Shavuos, the laws of giving food to the poor, Rosh Hashanah. Right, what's it doing there? It's like God said, I got this extra mitzvah, I don't know where to stick it. And so some guys, why don't you put it over here? Right? What's it got to do with that? It's got nothing to do with this. But that's not really true. These are the laws here that talks about how a person is supposed to take care of the poor. Right? And in the course of the year, if we're following the year, not just the holidays, this is the time. Right? You have Passover is when you plant, basically, right? The last week right before Passover, and then you've got like this time of year now, the produce starts to grow. Maybe not here because it's so cold, but in most places. And then you go through the whole summer and you get to Rosh Hashanah. So before Rosh Hashanah, you're now it's all grown, right? So it's appropriate. I'm going to tell you, now that you've got all of your wheat or barley or apples, whatever you're growing is growing and it's almost finished, I want you to know that you got to give some to the poor. Before you take it to the market, you got to give some to the poor. Now we'll talk about Rosh Hashanah, right? And it's the end, right? That makes sense. But when you look at it, that it's talking about the holidays, and it sticks this in because there's lots of other laws that happen also. They're not here, so it's telling us another message. So it's just put in right after Shavuos. And now, you hear from people lots of times that there's some things in the Torah you need the Torah to tell you. But there's some things in the Torah you don't need the Torah to tell you. Like, do I need the Torah to tell me I shouldn't steal? You know why I don't steal? I don't steal because I don't want you to steal from me. If I steal, right, I have a society that steals, then my stuff is not my stuff. You're going to steal it. I'm not going to approach your spouse because I don't want you to do it to me. I'm not going to like beat you up. I don't want you to beat me up. Right? That's logical. Right? So. I'm not going to attack your children. I don't want you to attack my children. I'm going to steal your money. Everything's like that, right? So what do I need the Torah for? Right? So you'd say you only need the Torah for like kosher. You need the Torah for Shabbos. Stuff is not logical, but this stuff's logical. So this is put in here to tell you that that's not true. It's why? Because it's putting it in and it's telling you that you have the holiday of Shavuos when we get the Torah. The next thing it tells you is what seems logical. You have to take care of the poor. Why? Because if you were poor, you'd want them to take care of you. You wouldn't want to starve to death in an affluent city. You have a city everybody's living, going out for dinner, spending $100 a person on a meal, and you don't have money for bread. Yeah, that's not a society you want to be a part of, right? So the saying that I don't need the Torah to tell me that is that we're saying yes, you do. The Torah teaches us everything. How do you know that you shouldn't kill somebody? It's not because it's logical. Because you don't want them to kill you? It's because the Torah says so. How do I know? Well, I'll give you an example. Is a person dying in bed, right? They're in bed and they got a disease, they're going to die in a month, and they're in great pain. Are you allowed to kill them? They're going to die in a month anyways, and you stop them from being in pain. Maybe I should kill them. You can't kill them. Why? Because that's murder. How about, that if that's murder, right? How about abortion? Is that murder? Maybe yes, maybe no. How do we know? The Torah has to tell us, right? Clearly, I can come up with a case that it's logical that I can't kill. It's logical I can't kill, that I can't go around killing people who I owe money to. As a way of not paying them back. Because somebody will kill me, right? That's logical. But the Torah tells us what killing is. Like, how do you know you can't murder somebody because you're mad at them, but if you're in a war, you can kill them? What's the difference? How do you know that maybe taking a life is forbidden? How do you know? Maybe we have to be pacifists. How do we know then that a doctor is allowed to do surgery on someone? Because you bring a person to the edge of death. And if you make a mistake, you're going to kill them. How do you're not going to, if you're trying to help somebody and doing surgery and they die, how do you know you didn't murder them? In war, you didn't murder. How about somebody attacks you? How do you know, where do you get the idea that self-defense is allowed? Somebody comes and he hits me, right? In order to stop him from beating me up, I punch him back. How do I know I'm allowed to do that? It's not just I can hit him back because I'd want him to hit me back. That doesn't make sense. The Torah tells us, Right? So here they have a logical thing. It's logical to know if you have poor people in society, you should take care of them. It's logical, right? They say that a society is judged by how you treat the weakest people. Right? So the poor person, right, who's living in the street, doesn't have money for food, that's pretty weak. So how do you treat them? That's logical. You don't need the Torah, but we do need the Torah. The Torah comes to tell us that you have to do it, even when it's in times of need, even when you don't necessarily have everything that you want, even when you're, like here, I'm going to make a wedding. I'm going to make a wedding. I got no money, extra money, right? Somebody comes for tzedakah. Can I say to him, I can't give you a tzedakah this year because I got to make a wedding? He has to eat too, right? I have a certain responsibility to help, even though maybe it's not logical for me. How about if I'm poor? Do I have to give money to tzedakah? So this the Torah tells us. So they put this rule in right after the Shavuos, because Shavuos is when we get the Torah. They tell you, you think it's logical. It's not. The Torah teaches us how to act all the time. Our ethics are from the Torah. We just sometimes come up with logical reasons for them, but it's not because the Torah doesn't need to tell us. It's the Torah tells us. Because otherwise we can't define it. We don't know the definition of life. We don't know the definition of death. We don't. Right? If euthanasia is a question in law, then we don't know the definition of death. And if abortion is a question in law, we don't know the definition of life either. And we don't know. The Torah has to tell us. We don't know what poor is. We don't. Somebody comes to me and tells me I can't afford your shul fees. Do I have to take them for less money? Well, if that's the case, then somebody might not get paid. But he deserves to get paid if he works. Right? But yet these people want to join the shul and they can't afford it. How about they need food? Right? If I give them food, I'm going to have less food in my house. Right? If I have just enough food to feed my family, do I have to invite a poor person in who comes by and needs some food? Now my family's going to have less to eat. So those are all examples that show us that the Torah is what tells us this. And that's why it's stuck in here at this point. Another reason that is in here is a reason that I speak about every year when we do our fundraising to help the poor in our shul. When we have a few times a year before Purim, before Pesach, and before Rosh Hashanah, where I raise money to give to people in the community who need money, who don't have. So what we do is when we go to do this, I tell them about a Rambam. The Rambam has a law, and he says that if you get together with your family on Yom Tov, right? Yeah, Yom Tov more than any other time, certain Yom Tovs especially, are holidays for family. Right? Passover is a great example. Right? Families get together. Right? So it's time for family. And you're having everybody over for a big meal. So the Rambam says, for Yom Tov, you have your family. For Yom Tov, you should have meat, if you eat meat. Right? You should have wine, if you like wine. You should have nice things at your meal. You also have to have poor people at your meal. He says, and if you don't have poor people at your meal, you're not having a Yom Tov meal. You're just filling your stomach. That's what he says. Right? Because the Rambam's telling us that the definition of celebrating is celebrating with people who can't celebrate. That's the definition. Now, you ever notice, we're made this way, you ever notice that when you're happy, you want everyone to be happy? You make a wedding, you make a bar mitzvah. Everybody has to come. You want everyone there. You want to make everybody should come and be a part of it. If I'm happy, everyone's got to be happy. But what happens when you're depressed? You always go by yourself. You isolate. Right? Depressed people, even I don't mean medically depressed. You're having a bad time. Right? Whatever it is, something that appears bad happened. So what do? You go by yourself. You go in your room. You close the door. Right? It's natural. Because when we're not happy, we isolate ourselves. So on Yom Tov, it's a happy time. How do you do that? By celebrating with people. So the definition of celebrating with people is include those who don't have. Right? So that's one of the reasons that it's put in here, because these are all the holidays. How are you going to celebrate Pesach? How are you going to celebrate Shavuos, Rosh Hashanah, Sukkot, Shmini Atzeres? How are you going to celebrate them? You have to celebrate them by making sure the poor are taken care of. Then you can celebrate them. Right? I was learning the laws and customs of marriage. So it was an interesting custom. It says that for those who are able to, we always pray that people, you make a wedding, you certainly don't want to have to make another wedding for the same person again a year later, right? It happens sometimes. Marriage doesn't work, right? You don't want to have to do it. So it says there are certain things that you can do that try to help. that shouldn't happen. So of course you can be smart about it, counseling and making sure that people are really fit for each other and that they're doing this for the right reason. There's all that. Put that aside. Let's say you did that. Let's say we want to get the blessing of Torah on this marriage. What do you do? So it says, of all the interesting things, it says one of the things for those who are able to is that when you make a wedding, you should send money to Jerusalem so that someone in Jerusalem who doesn't have money should be able to make a wedding at the same time as your wedding because you're giving the money. And that way, in the merit of the poor people being able to get married at the same time that your child gets married, because of you, then the marriage of your child will be a happy one, right? Not guaranteed, but it'll be happier. So you say, well, why that? And why does it say that all the time? If I want to have success in my business, I'm going to send over some money so a poor guy can do a business deal in Jerusalem at the same time as me. It doesn't say that. Only by the wedding it says that. Because when I'm happy, everyone has to be happy, right? But if I'm happy because it's a Torah celebration, so then it's a good thing. If I'm only happy because I'm getting rid of my daughter, right? I'm only happy because I want to show off how much money I have, so that doesn't do it, right? That's the idea. Right, of what it's telling us here. That's another reason that it's stuck in the middle. Okay. All right, then it goes into Sukkos, Shmini Atzeres, and then it talks a bit about. All right, the next thing it talks about here is some interesting things within the Beis Hamikdash on 690 and 691. And first it talks about the menorah. Right, you have to have olive oil that has to be made in order to have for the eternal light and the menorah. Right? So there's other place in the Torah that talks about the menorah and how it's made and why it's made the way it is and so forth. And we know a lot about the menorah. But then the next thing is that this very odd bread. If you look, starting with verse 5, right, you have to take fine flour. Right? And you bake it into 12 loaves of bread. And each loaf has to be a certain size. And then you have a certain type of spices for fragrance that you burn alongside of it. And then what they would do is that every Friday before Shabbos, the Kohen would come and he would have this special table, and on the table would be 12 loaves of bread. They would sit there from Friday before Shabbos until the next week, Friday before Shabbos, symbolic of bread that we're making as an offering to God. Of course, the bread doesn't go anywhere. It's still there. Right? There are certain miracles that happen with the bread, and that is fresh and hot as it was when you put it there, it was a week later. That's what it says. And then it says that it always had to be there. So the fact is, if you replace it, it's not always there, because you have to take it off and put one on. For a moment, it's nothing there. So it says that it was so important that it was always there. The Kohanim used to slide one off as they slid one on, so that as it went off, there was one on. There was never a time when there was a piece missing. So they would always do all 12 pieces in that way, so that there was always 12 loaves there, and they were there. What is this? What do they symbolize? They symbolize an important concept, which is that God gives us sustenance. When we think I'm a self-made millionaire, right? I started out penniless. I worked very hard. I'm a millionaire now. By the time I'm 30, I'm a self-made millionaire. Right? There's no such thing. Judaism tells us you have to work, and you have to put in the effort, and you have to use your ingenuity. But God is the one who makes it work. How can you have? And we see it. Certainly, the older you get, the more you see that there's no guarantees. For instance, on the one hand, if you are a doctor, so a doctor, when you're a young person, doctors are rich, right? So we know. Well, I think now in our lives, we know some doctors who are rich. We know some who aren't. Right? Yeah, we know some people who are, who you say, well, you tell your kids, you got to go to get an education, go to university. Why do we tell them that? Because we want them to make a living. We know people who went to university don't make a living. We know people who didn't go who make a very good living. They're some of the richest people in the world didn't go to university. Right? Well, on the other hand, some of the best educated people in the world are poor, because you have to make the effort, and you have to do it, but nothing's guaranteed because God's the one who puts in the last piece and makes it work. Right? The fact that that's there, that we know this, is symbolized by this bread. That's what that sacrifice symbolizes. Right? And we have many occurrences where this discussion about this bread comes up because it's symbolic. Like, for instance, there's a famous story of one of the Amoraim. I don't have it with me, but one of the rabbis in the Talmud. He goes and it says that he had a dream. He was talking about Manasseh, who was the king of Israel, and Manasseh was a wicked king. He was a terrible king. He led the Jewish people to sin. And he says to his friends, he says, tomorrow in our class, we're going to talk about our good friend Manasseh. And he's being sarcastic. And he goes home, goes to sleep, and in his sleep he has a dream. And Manasseh comes to him in a dream and says, who are you to call me your friend? I'm not your friend. I'm so much greater than you. I know so much more Torah than you. You're a nobody to me. Who are you? Now, this is Manasseh, the evil king who made everybody worship idols. And he's telling it to this great rabbi. Right? You're a nobody compared to me. Right? So the rabbi says, looks at him funny, so he says, all right, I'll show you. I'm going to ask you one question of Jewish law. This is Manasseh, says the rabbi. One question of Jewish law. You answer the question, okay, I'll believe you. You can be my friend. But you won't know it. So he says, when you make hamotzi on bread, where do you cut the bread? Right? So the rabbi says, I don't know. So he says, that's right, you're an idiot. You don't know. I'll tell you. So he tells him you cut it at the spot that's baked the best. You find the part of the bread that's the most baked, that's where you cut it. And it's true. That's the law. So the rabbi says back to him, so if you know so much, why did you worship idols? So he tells him, Manasseh says, well, who are you to ask me? I'll tell you, if you lived when I lived, and you had the desires that we had, like, today, we have desires for intimacy, right? We have this. Maybe not so much now, but certainly when you were young, you have desire to be with the opposite sex. It's a craving, right? It's hard to understand. It's like you really want this. They had that then for worshiping idols. It says in the Torah, in the Talmud, it tells us how people had the same strong desire to worship an idol that we have for this. And eventually the rabbis prayed to God to get rid of it because people couldn't handle it. It was too strong. But it says they prayed that they shouldn't have the desire for intimacy. But it says the next day they got up, there were no eggs because the chickens didn't have the desire for intimacy either. So they prayed that God should give that back. But the one for idol worship, they didn't want back. So the king says, if you had been alive when we were alive, and we had this that we had, you would have picked up your coat and ran as fast as you could to worship idols. You would have been worse than me. Right? So, well, I want to say, why is it, of all the questions that this king asked the rabbi, he asked him, where do you cut bread? Like, what kind of question is that? If I want to ask you a question to see if you're a scholar, I'm not going to ask you, where do you cut bread? Why is that? So he was sending a message. The idea is as follows. Manasseh, right, it's not that Manasseh didn't believe in God, right, in this way. The idea was that he believed that God sort of stood back and let us do what we wanted to do. He brought us into the world, and we got to make a living, and we got to take care of ourselves. There is no justice. There's no nothing. You do whatever you want to do. Right? That's how they saw it. That's how he saw it. So he says to him, what is bread? Bread, we just told you, bread is the symbol of God's involvement in our life and making a living and supporting us. Right? So he says to him, how do you know where to cut the bread? He's saying to him, you don't know nothing about God's involvement in your life. God's not involved in your life, Manasseh says. And he says, and that was his whole point. He was trying to tell him that, in fact, and this is why it applies to the Parsha. If you look at the next section of the Parsha, right after the story of the bread, it talks about a guy who curses God. The rabbis call him the one who blessed God, because they don't want to say it. But he cursed God. Right? He goes out and he curses God. So here it says that what happens to him, that they have to kill such a person who blasphemes against God. So it begins at the top of 692, it's 93. It says, the son of an Israelite woman went out. So that the rabbis ask, he went out from where? Where was he? Right? It starts out with, hey, he went out. Right? You start a story. You don't start a story by saying he left somewhere unless they tell you where he left. So where did he come from? So it says went out. He went out from the section we just read. right? The line before, talking about the bread. That this fellow, it's not that he didn't believe in God. He didn't believe that God supports us, right? And he's the one who cursed God, right? And because of it, the Jewish people had to kill him, because he had an effect on people. If you have a person who has a misconception of God, and he teaches this to people, people have a misconception about God. So they had to get rid of him. And then after that, after it tells you have to kill him, the Torah says in the bottom of this page, the laws of murder. If a man strikes mortally any human life, he shall be put to death. Right? If I kill a human, right, I'm put to death. And if a man who strikes mortally an animal, he has to pay a life for a life. So it's two interesting points here. For a human being, you're put to death. For killing an animal, you have to pay the owner. A life for a life. What do we mean a life for a life? We just told you it's not a life for a life. We just told you it's money for a life. Right? I just said it. And it says a life for a life. This tells you that one of the biggest misconceptions that there is about the Torah. When you hear from non-Jews, or even Jews who don't know Torah, they'll tell you, an eye for an eye. What does it mean? Oh, the ancient Torah, the wrathful God of the Old Testament says, if I poke out someone's eye, they have to poke out my eye. That's biblical justice. That's not what it is. It doesn't mean that. That's what the words say. But the Torah is not a simple book. It's telling you the worth of an eye you have to pay for poking out someone's eye. Not just you have to pay him something and walk away. What with this guy? Did he need his eyes for work? Let's say you broke a guy's arm, right? But he's a professor. Okay, so it hurt him. You have to pay something. You did something wrong. But can he still do his job? Yeah, he can still make a living. How about if he was a surgeon? Can't do his job anymore. He's going to make millions. And you caused him not to do it. So you got to pay more, right? So it's an arm for an arm, a hand for a hand, an eye for an eye. That's how it works. Not literally, right? I go and I break a surgeon's arm so he can come and break my arm. Well, that makes no sense. That's not what the Torah means. That's why it says here, a life for a life, right after telling you it's not a life for a life. It's money for a life. An animal, and it's also telling you that an animal's life and a human life are two different things. It doesn't, right? We have laws. You have to treat animals correctly. But nowhere does it say, right, that you have to, that a human life and animal life are the same. Right? This is an error, in my opinion, with the animal rights people. The animal rights people give human feelings and human ideas to animals. And because of it, that they're doing is that they're equating us to animals. And they know they are. I'm not making this up. They see us as the same. On a certain level, they see that humans and animals are the same. You kill an animal like killing a human. And it should be the same punishment. The Torah tells us it's not the case. An animal and human are different. Now, in fact, there's a very interesting law. It tells us in the Torah that you're allowed to eat animals. Right? You can eat steak. That's eating an animal. Right? If we were really the same, there would be cannibalism. You couldn't. So the Torah says, there's a law in the Code of Jewish Law that says that if a person is a Torah observer, so they're above animals. Right? We're human. We're above animals. But what if a human being acts like an animal? Right? Like an animal. Like really, they're just grotesque people. So it says, according to the letter of the law, that person shouldn't be able to eat animal. Shouldn't be able to eat steak. Because that's cannibalism. Because a person turned himself into an animal. He's no better than an animal, symbolically. Right? So too, that's telling us that an animal and human are different. But you're not allowed to be cruel to the animal. But you are allowed to use the animal. Right? And that's where you have problems between those two. Right? Now, one of the reasons that it tells you this here, it says, the life of a human, then it talks about an animal, and what happens. And then it tells you I have to take care of a convert because I am God. Is telling you, it's equating certain things. First thing is telling you how supreme human life is over animal life. And then it's telling you how you have to be sensitive to even strangers. In other words, people will very often equate strangers, people who are different, as being very, very different, almost like an animal. Right? Like what happens, for instance, in war? In war, a country will do whatever they can to try to make their soldiers see the enemy as not being human. That's why you had in World War II, the American soldiers had these ugly names for the enemy, In Vietnam, same thing. They had ugly names for the enemy. They had, they said really, the disgusting names for these people. Why? To make them less human. Because I can't kill someone who's just like me. But if he's less human than me, I can kill him. So that's what they did. The Torah is telling you here that humans, it makes no difference if he's a stranger, if he's a convert, right? Whoever he is, he's a human. He has to be treated like a human. Right? An animal is different, but a human has to be treated like a human. So this is where, if anybody has any feelings that the Torah says that a non-Jew is less of a human than a Jew, this proves that wrong. Right? A Jew, we have certain responsibilities to Jews that we don't have to non-Jews, but we have responsibilities to non-Jews also. They're not animals. They're human beings, and they have to be treated with the respect. They have to be treated with the same idea as other human beings, like Jews. There are certain rules that we have that are different. It's just like, like it says you can't charge interest to a Jew, but you can charge interest to a non-Jew. So some people say, well, that's because we don't like non-Jews. That's not true. For instance, it's telling us a special rule. For instance, let's say, I come to you and I need some money, right? And I ask you, can I have a loan? So you say, sure, you want to help me out, but it's 5% interest, right? Well, it's not. Let's say everybody else charging 10, you charge me 5. Okay, you're being nice to me, so I'll do it. But if your brother came to you for a loan, your brother was in trouble, and he needed some money, would you charge him interest? I would hope not, right? So the Torah is telling you all Jews are brothers. Right? It's not that non-Jews are not human. They're not your brother. They're not part of your family. If they're part of your family, you wouldn't charge your family interest, but they're not part of your family. So it's not that charging interest is evil, but it's stupid to charge your family interest. You don't charge your father comes to you, something happened, and here you are, you're successful now, and your father is barely not getting by. Something happened to him. And he comes to you for a loan. You're going to charge your father interest? Of course not. But a stranger comes to you, you would, and you're not doing anything wrong. Right? So it's the same idea here. You have to treat a non-Jew with dignity. You don't treat him like a Jew because there are certain things that you do for family, but you don't treat him in any way badly or without respect. That's what the Torah is telling us here, and that's how it concludes.